What's the most useless thing they teach in school? The tongue/taste map. Not only useless, but incorrect. My son came home a couple of weeks ago talking about the different tastes on the tongue. I live in Florida though, so the fact that they believe in taste at all is probably a good sign. Could you elaborate please? The entire life of my school founder, the worst of bullies, that they teach us the same thing all the years. Why would anyone need that? I presume it's a vanity thing the founder installed at some point. I will pay for the creation of a school, but I have one caveat. I graduated in 1991 for context, and, while living in Phoenix, they taught us square dancing in gym class. I must say though, that the most useful skill that I was taught at that school that I use every single day is typing. Square dancing has been taught in schools for many decades, all thanks to the industrialist Henry Ford. He pushed for it hard and won. He didn't like the new dances people were doing and wanted this American tradition preserved. Yeah, but in all fairness, in elementary school it was probably our first chance to have physical contact with a girl. In order to graduate middle school you were required to complete the Cupid Shuffle, Cotton Eye Joe, and Electric Slide in front of your class. I guess this taught us the concept of pure embarrassment. Like, just by yourself you had to get up in front of the class and dance. We all learned as a class, but for the final test we had to dance all alone on the gym floor, while your whole class watched you dance to Cotton Eye Joe being quietly played from a CD player. They taught competitive cup stacking in my elementary school. Still have no idea why. Shoot, why not? What better way to get hand-eye coordination up? That's the thing so many people miss about grade school. You're not actually expected to use most of the knowledge you gain there. It's about learning how to learn. It's about learning how to commit to understanding a thing, even if it seems boring or useless. That's what prepares you to excel in life. But if you end up actually finding a use for advanced algebra, well that's a bonus. In my experience, the way Jim and Pe were taught were pretty useless because they never taught us how to train or improve our athletic abilities. It was just weeks of half-heartedly playing basketball with minimal adult supervision, and then one day we had to run a mile and the coaches would go out of their way to humiliate anyone who couldn't just get up and run a mile under 10 minutes with no training or preparation. It put me off running and exercise in general for a long time. And I hate to say it, many of the PE teachers and coaches were pretty unhealthy themselves. All my gym teachers were fat, middle-aged men. I was taught that Columbus knew that the world was round, but everyone else thought it was flat. So, yeah, that. By college I was calling American history the but actually class. I had it in elementary school, middle school, high school, and then in college. Every time I took it, the teacher basically said, I know that you were taught blank in whatever grade, but actually what happened was. Example. Elementary school, Lewis and Clark were super brave and the lessons made it seem like it was just the two of them venturing into the unknown west. Middle school, Sacagawea was there too. High school, actually there were like 30 people on that expedition. Well, I'm old so take my answer in context. How to use an abacus. When I was younger I learned the abacus enough in Asian math school that I was able to do abacus calculations using muscle memory, so essentially an invisible abacus, which allowed me to do double-digit multiplication in my head pretty easily, so pretty helpful if you can do that. I knew I should have studied Asian math. The way the US public school system teaches it, Spanish, you learn it maybe half a year then forget it over the summer. You'd think with years of education we'd be better Spanish speakers, but it's essentially useless the way it's taught. I took 2 years in school and barely learned anything. I can still pick up a word here and there but that's it. Not to brag, but after 3 years of Spanish classes, I understand every word and hips don't lie. You won't have a calculator in your pocket in the real world. Yeah I know, as mad off as it made me in class, I'm a bit grateful to be able to do math without a calculator. Then again, I suck at math, so. Completely opposite, when I was in high school we had driver's ed, gun training, basic car maintenance, home economics a class when we learned how to do taxes. Where and when did you go to school? I learned how to fill out a 1040 as in social studies, and home economics was a required class. The rest of those were offered by my school or the community college, for high school credit. North Chicago suburb, early 2000s. This is going to sound stupid, but history the way it's taught is basically meaningless. A long category of dates and events without context or real discussion. The vast majority of history is trivia, because the real story is the cyclical nature of events, the rise and fall of empires, the periods of enlightenment and advance and the reactionary times that bookend them. You learn that there used to be this thing called yellow journalism, but you don't learn that what kicked it off was the sudden availability and popularity of newspapers, and nobody draws the extremely obvious parallel to our modern blog-driven media. If I told you that in the mid to late 1800s, when newsprint was blowing up, that it was extremely common for papers to blatantly copy each other's stories with added editorial bias tailored to their viewers. Sounds a little familiar, doesn't it? Drawing parallels between the robber barons of the late 1800s and the current ones. Drawing parallels between the labor movements of that era and the ones that are growing again today. Crap's relevant and important to realizing context. But no. Just memorize some freaking dates and names, so you'll have some crap to spout at trivia night later. Yeah, the funny thing is I hated history when I was in school and love it now that I'm not. Turns out teaching history as rote memorization of dates is a bullcrap way to teach it. I don't know how I'd do it better, but frick, the way schools teach history is just bad. Teach it as a story. It's right there in the name, history. I really started to love history once I saw how one thing leads into another, which leads into another. When you can see how all of the pieces fit together to lead to the result that they did, you can actually understand what happened. And sometimes you can see some of the same pieces coming together again. They mostly taught us to ask permission in order to use the bathroom. 40 years I've been asking permission to piss. I can't squeeze a drop without say so. Hi there, Red. That you have to ignore bullies and or forgive them. In real outside world, if you bully someone you will 1. Get slapped across the face. 2. Get kicked in your butt. 3. Fired from work. Or 4. Shunned and made fun of. P.S. My friend's nephew got bullied at school. The bully was pocking him with his finger so hard that the next day the nephew had like 20 small bruises all over his back. The teacher just told him to ignore him and made the bully apologize. Now I dare you to go to work tomorrow and start pocking people and I see how far you go. If someone beats you up in high school it's bullying and boys will be boys. The moment you turn 18 suddenly it's called assault and they can go to jail for that. I had the pleasure of yelling that at my principal in 10th grade. Basically calling her out that as a teenager they wouldn't do anything about it, but the moment my bully turned 18 I could have his ass arrested. Suddenly she took the bullying situation differently now that I threatened to bring the cops in. That's a problem with the schools nowadays. Completely unwilling to act, especially when it is easier to just punish the victim for complaining. As you learned, they generally fear the police more than doing their jobs. That hiding under your desk will keep you safe from bombs and tornadoes. Yes, I know what it's actually for. It's just always been a silly visual. That wasn't the lesson you could have learned. The real lesson was that people tend to panic, and panicking causes unpredictable and dangerous behavior. When you drill an action that makes a population feel like they have self-control over a situation, they will tend to follow that. Same as with patients and a disease, so often there is conflict between clinician and patient because the clinician will see it as the patient not being able to do anything, medically proven at least, whereas the patient is looking for some agency, some self-control over a situation, even if that is drinking carrot juice or whatever. This helps explain the multitude of holistic medicines and why they are popular, because there is always something you can do, or feel like there is, to have agency in a difficult situation. As others have said, the lesson wasn't always literally the subject matter / what was being taught. I agree. There was an actual fire in my high school at one point. I always figured fire drills were one thing because we all knew nothing was actually happening, but that there would be panic in the event of a real fire. But to my surprise, everyone calmly evacuated and no one was injured. I can say with decent confidence that I don't think anything I learned was really useless. There's stuff I haven't used, but I don't regret learning it. You know, I like your take. Learning stuff is cool. I feel like almost everything has some value, but I really wished that they taught high school classes on operating systems, Excel, and an introduction to programming and logic. I learned it all in college, but Excel saved me a ton of time on homework. Programming played a much greater role than I could have imagined, and high school left me unprepared for that. That's crazy you didn't. I live in the most rural ass place in Iowa, and we have computer apps, which is basically a semester class on that kinda stuff. Not useless, just poorly taught. History. It was just a collection of dates, names, and numbers. Memorize this stuff. We'll have a test. The significance of so many historical events was never taught or discussed. WW2 was the only one that was somewhat approached at scale, but even then it boiled down to Germany was mad off about WW1 and Hitler hated the Jews. This was at a good high school too. The whole class was in advanced classes, IB/app. Actually history was one subject which was taught pretty well in my school. I'm in the UK. It taught deductive reasoning, analytical skills, finding multiple sources to verify historical truth, etc. Pretty useful subject all around. Really sucks that your experience wasn't like this. That classical literature is the end all be all of reading. I get some books have cultural significance, but that doesn't warrant a 6-week in-depth analysis of a book kids can't relate to, with most being about challenges they will never face, culminating in an essay that's basically I understood it repeated over and over backed up by quotes. If you want your kids to never touch a book in their lives ever again, that is how you do it. I remember having to read Shakespeare's Julius Caesar and Much Ado About Nothing, and then having to endure weeks of mental masturbation about all the themes and narratives. Felt like a complete waste of time, and put me off reading for a long time. This is the most egregious. It's a play, not a novel. It's not even meant to be read at all. No wonder it makes for a terrible read. Cursive. I have never used it outside of signing my name. It's being phased out sorta. It's taught to kids young, but I think it's mostly about teaching kids to learn. They told us that in college they wouldn't accept anything that wasn't written in cursive. They don't do it anymore, but back around 2000 in health class we all had to plan a wedding. Like, pair up and budget out a rental space, food, rings, etc. Looking back, what the frick? I mean, the budgeting part would have been nice to have had, but it would have been better to have it be general budgeting, not wedding budgeting per se. Though I suppose it would have been fun, when I did get married, to see how close I could stay to the budget I had made then. I think it's a good exercise though. Teach kids young that weddings can get very expensive very quickly, and maybe they'll dream a little smaller or decide to get married a little later. My secondary school made us all take religion up to GCSE level. That was so freaking pointless, especially when you had limited choices on what subjects you could take. The other side of your point, I took a world religions class, and it was great. We went through the core element and history of all major religions. Highly enlightening. I think, like a lot of things, it depends entirely on the way it is taught. There's a good way and a bad way to teach it. Square dancing. I have no idea why the hell they thought it was necessary to teach a bunch of middle school kids square dancing in California, not some backwoods school, but I have never seen anything related to square dancing since then. And this wasn't even a one-time class or something. The teachers carried on for months teaching it, and then I never heard about it again. It's because Henry Ford pushed it as a national standard in schools, because he did not at all like the increasing popularity of jazz, because jazz was a tool of the Jew. You'd think it'd be because of racism, right? Well, it was, but black people music was the Jews' fault. Ford wrote about it in the International Jew. Anywho, Ford spent a bunch of money convincing school districts to add square dancing to the curriculum, which would hopefully get kids to appreciate good wholesome white dancing. Writing and spelling. Useless. Double spacing after punctuation. I can't unlearn the habit. They taught you that. I thought that was just a weird thing some people did. When was that ever accepted as the standard? That was definitely accepted as a standard. It's certainly how I was taught and graded, and I can't turn it off mentally. I'm happy when my phone autocorrects it to a proper one space. Religion 9+1 years of listening to the same old crap. At least in high school, it was little different. Teaching religion in school for theological is dumb. However, studying the mythologies behind various religions from a philosophical path, as well as their cultural impact over human history, is incredibly useful for adding context to sociology MO. I would guess this guy went to Catholic school. The philosophy/historical stuff we learned was interesting, and even if you abhor religion, it is still a huge part of history and should be learned about. Learning the exact same story of Jesus every year for 12 years was a huge waste of time, especially when half of my classmates couldn't do long division in high school, and I do think the story of Jesus itself is quite virtuous, that you just wanted people to get along and share with others, but a full year curriculum on the Gospels for 12 years is not the best use of resources. The universal experience of learning how to play hot cross buns on the recorder. Write a sorry letter for defending yourself, busted a kid's lip for hitting and trying to choke me, and got sent straight to the office. Elementary school needs to be renamed to glue eating school. Oof, my father had taught me how to bruise the insides and not the out. Of course it was a small town and everyone knew each other's gossip. I remember Robert had came up to me laughing at my scrawny figure. Then I mentioned how his mother left him, and even his first adopted family didn't even want to keep his sorry ass. Of course I had to apologize, and I did feel sorry, but that whole bullcrap for just let it happen. That's what's annoying. I don't think anything is truly useless. Each subject/topic exposes you to a different sphere. You may like some and dislike others, but without being introduced to them, you wouldn't even know about its existence. College is the time you can focus on whatever specific sphere you like/want. You're right. Truly useless? No. A waste of time better spent on something more useful is a better description. Plenty of things in that category. Muggle studies. Oh sorry, wrong thread. You just risked the exposure of our world. In the US, probably the Pledge of Allegiance. We did that every day from 1st grade through 12th grade. Let's say it took a minute per day. That's 5 minutes a week. Every 12 weeks, that's an hour. You're in school roughly 36 weeks a year, so that's 3 hours a year. Multiplied by 12 years and that's about 36 hours of your youth academic career spent talking to a flag. We had some punk kid, when I was in 7th grade, actually get suspended, then take it to court and he won. So by high school, we could sit through the Pledge of Allegiance. Pretty sure you could have done it anyway, but this made the district finally stop giving a crap. That is, of course, unless you had this one substitute teacher who would literally demand every student recite the pledge in her classrooms, lest they be yelled at, threatened, and called a communist/fascist who spat on her dead sons. He was a Marine. Grave. You are not required to say the pledge and schools can't legally force you to. I sat through the pledge for various moral reasons. Got screamed at by teachers, but freedom of speech is a thing they should understand, being that they're pledging allegiance to America and all. The bell doesn't dismiss you. I do. Of course the bell dismisses you. What you're being prepared for, however, is a lifetime of bosses telling you that coming in 15 minutes before your shift and staying 10 minutes after doesn't count as overtime and doesn't need to be paid. That it's okay to violate that safety rule on site because OSHA isn't paying you. I am, and the customer is waiting on you. Basically, anytime an authority figure isn't following the rules they themselves set for everyone, you are being trained to accept that behavior in your adult life. Getting to post-secondary and having adults respect you as an adult is trippy, like that both educators and students have lives to pursue outside of class. As someone who thinks about pursuing public teaching highly, I despise assuming an authoritarian role like that, though I fear it'll be necessary. I was coming in here ready to defend education and say that even information you don't use in your everyday life has value. Then I read the first comment and realized I had rose-colored glasses on pretty fast. That conduct grades matter. I have a friend whose child got a needs improvement conduct grade. WTF is that about? If her 8-year-old is causing problems, address it then. Why wait 9 weeks and slip it onto the report card? My friend is also a teacher and completely agreed with me. I got plenty of unsatisfactory conduct grades in school, and yet I still managed to get a college degree and have a career. Screw that nonsense. I got a needs improvement for not turning in an assignment. I was acing the class and I wasn't even causing a disturbance. It's totally meaningless. I might just be holding on to an old grudge against my teacher. My English teacher subbed for gym one day and taught us how children in poorer countries made a ball out of trash to kick around, and when he showed us his, he kicked the damn thing right in my face, and then while playing the game, he kicked it into my stomach. So yay, useless trash balls I know how to make now. What to think instead of how to think. This. Especially when the teachers got mad because you found an easier, more reliable and faster way to solve problems than the right way, an outdated strategy that is essentially useless unless you sit down, grab a piece of paper and painstakingly work through it. Same as show your work. In the real world you need to be able to calculate things fast, not have to go through a whole process just to get an answer. I grew up in Massachusetts, so maybe this is skewed because of the proximity to early settler and Revolutionary War sites, but every year in history, from like 1st grade to 12th, we learned the same stuff on the early settlers to Revolutionary War. That would be the majority of all history classes. Yes, it's very important history, and I do thoroughly enjoy history in that time period in particular, but when it's all that's covered and everything else is glossed over, it doesn't feel like we learned as much as we should have. It was also always taught through rose-colored glasses. Curious though for other people who grew up in the US, but not New England, was that the case for you? Or are us Bostonians really just so enamored with our small and reckless driving state that we forget others exist? Texas. We were stuck learning about Texas every year. History. Schools purposely ignore explaining the importance of history to a spiteful degree, and from there it's by far the most politicized subject. So much is glazed over to give the prettiest image of any country you're learning history in, such as King George III got a much different story told in US history textbooks vs the story my wife and I got of him from museums when we had our honeymoon in the UK. Other information is just wrong with a bizarre refusal to get corrected, the most famous being Christopher Columbus, who was not the first European to reach North America, nor was North America discovered by anyone from Europe. It was learned about by the European powers. Honorable mention goes to English class. For similar reasons, I only had one English class that actually put an emphasis on improving one's language skills, and it was elective, creative writing. Every other class in high school and college was a weird compulsory book club. The problem with history is there's no time in primary or secondary schools to get in depth with anything or add much context. You have to go over everything at such a high level that there's no way to really relate the past to the present. Hence, we now have large numbers of incredibly ignorant people who can't see when history starts repeating. PE was not only completely useless, but a bitch to deal with being disabled. I'm not wheelchair bound, but I'm physically disabled and was still forced to run the mile, do sports, etc. despite having docs against it. Didn't get anything out of it but pain. On the opposite end, economy was an amazing class I think, should be a federal requirement. Too many people have no understand of even the basics. We were living in South Jersey at the time the Eagles went to the Super Bowl in 2004, and my elementary school taught us the Eagles fight song. Had a whole school assembly by grade level to teach us the Philadelphia Eagles fight song, and we weren't dismissed till we all knew it. Shoulder rock to Giants hoodie that day. My school notoriously controlled kids socializing, expecting us to constantly stay quiet. My social skills are trash now. Hi, language teacher in the UK. This is more what they don't teach. They often teach the rise of the British Empire, but seldom about the fall, which leads students with a very British-centric approach to a lot of their studies. I'm aware of this in languages, but I've seen this in history, and even English language. I'm not blaming the teachers or the students, the curriculum is screwed. But as a result from this, I hear way too often learning X language is pointless, everyone speaks English. That your entire self-worth is based off of a letter and score. Cursive writing. I could tape a pen to my pen and form a perfectly legal and acceptable signature. How to ruin what might otherwise be a perfectly enjoyable book by poring over it to pick out every last speck of nuance, hidden meaning and/or symbolism from it. The amount they teach Shakespeare, like, sure once is probably good, not every year grade 9 to 12.